All right, what is going on, everybody? We are back for week 2 NFL lineup/contest review with myself and Max Steinberg. We did this last week. We got a bunch of good feedback, positive feedback. Appreciate you guys watching it and letting us know your thoughts here. But like we said last week, we want to try and do this each and every week here, reviewing the past slate. So, Max, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I looked at some of the contests before we got on video, and I feel like Contest Rewind is just such an awesome tool. It can help you learn quite a bit and really evaluate your process and how you can change your process on a week-to-week basis in a really objective way. So I'm really excited to dive into this again. I think it was a very interesting week, and there's some cool stuff we can highlight. So let's get into it.
Right on. All right, we're going to get SaberSim pulled up here. And then just for you guys not so familiar with it, on the Pro and Ultimate plans, if you go to contests, you're going to see your contest, which is your CSV that you played. And then if you close that, open up all contests, these are all the contests in the DraftKings lobby here. So we're going to scroll down and start with the $555 Millie Maker here. So it's going to click the view icon, and then that will bring up all the contest information. So you can see the players and lineups here. So we are going to start with somebody who 150 max this contest, which is the max amount of entries for it. So that is going to be Chipotle Addict, top DFS pro. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of him. So going to just use a magnifying glass to key in on his lineup so we can see his actual exposures and all the relevant information here. And then I'm just going to pop out these lineups here so we can see more than one at a time, and then sort these descending by, did we want to go actual ROI or sim ROI?
No, let's do sim ROI.
All right.
So I just want to highlight here is, if you just actually look at the contest and look at people who 150 maxed who had a really high sim ROI, he, I think, was in the top 3. And also he's just such a respected player. We just thought he was a good person to look at. So, I mean, Andrew's just going to highlight it here, but you can basically filter and just say, let's just look at only 150 maxers, which is not a lot of players actually. And you can see that he is in the top 3, and, he stood out to me just because he's a great player. And if you look at his lineup, something very interesting comes up, right? And I think it was the difference here between having profitable lineups and not having profitable lineups. There's a huge difference. And that was with Kyren Williams, right? So, what actually happened is 10 minutes before lock, there was some news that Cam Akers was going to be inactive, which, at the very least, depending on how you're interpreting this, is going to boost Kyren Williams' projection anywhere from 2 to 4 points, depending on how bullish you think it is for him. And, SaberSim was actually quite high on him, and rightly so. And what that ended up doing is that, if you had him in your lineups, it just takes a lineup from being somewhat profitable to very profitable because he ended up being so low owned. He was only 6% owned in the actual contest. And that was for high stakes, right? That's with a lot of high stakes players swapping into him. In lower stakes contests, he probably came in at 1 to 3% ownership. And so that was just a huge advantage for someone like Chipotle Addict. You can see that in his very top lineup, he doesn't have him. But why don't we just look at a lot of the lineups? Because you can see that in a lot of the top lineups that he had, he ended up having Kyren Williams.
Going to pop out these lineups so we can just see, quite a bit all in one screen here. And Max, just kind of tell me, what stands out to you, what you're seeing here.
Well, I think 2 things stand out to me is one, the Kyren Williams thing. And if you look, right, it's, you can have a chalky lineup here, like someone just having Joe Burrow 3 stacks, or Josh Allen even. I don't know if Kyren is in that Josh Allen lineup. That's his 5th best lineup. Oh, I guess he's not. But basically Trevor Lawrence, looking at this lineup, it's pretty chalky, right? It's like Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones. Those are going to be probably the 2 most popular people you can stack with Trevor Lawrence, and Jamar Chase, who's super popular. But the fact that he has Kyren Williams and just a couple other things just makes it so that chalky lineup can be really good. So that's something that stands out to me right off the bat. Is there anything that stands out to you, Andrew?
I think that point, just to piggyback there, really builds off of like what we kind of talked about last week, where you can play the chalk and you don't have to, get off of them super hard. But if you find, the right pieces around it to balance that lineup out, that you shouldn't feel bad about going with a stack that is going to be a little higher owned overall.
Yeah. Another thing that stands out is just its top lineup, because it's really interesting. Because like if you think about like process, right, and you're just thinking about the Cowboys game, it's not a good game environment for them, right? As they're facing the Jets. The Jets are starting quarterback who, even before this game, you're thinking maybe they're just going to straight up sign someone else next week, right? They don't trust him. And you think, okay, there's going to be a lot of running. Dallas's defense is really good. But then what ends up happening is, if you look at Dak Prescott's ownership, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, I think because everyone's sort of thinking in that same way, they ended up having really low ownership. I think Dak Prescott might have been a few percent owned. Yeah, he was actually under 1% owned. And Gallup too, only 1% owned. And so it's sort of like
Lamb 2%. Wow.
Yeah. And before the contest, we certainly were not projecting them to get that low ownership. But the thing is something can be a bad setup, and if everyone's kind of thinking the same way, especially in these smaller field contests, they might end up being really good plays, because everything is kind of on a probability scale, right? It's like, the setup is that it's a lower probability that the stack is going to go off, but it's never a zero probability. And it seems like, these higher stakes players just kind of overcompensate for that and just thought they were not going to stack Cowboys, and it ended up being a mistake because they ended up being too low on.
Yeah, I mean, and it looks like they did just fine, right? Look at all these actual scores here. So I think that's really interesting point. One other thing that I did want to, which we kind of talked about before here, maybe switching gears a little bit, is we talk about this Kyren Williams situation, with the late swap, taking advantage of that. And then there was like another interesting running back situation here with the Colts, specifically with Zach Moss and Deion Jackson. Yeah. So if you're good with it, going to switch gears a little bit here, going to go over to the Colts, going to jump over to these running backs and really quickly here. So just looking at the SaberSim projection column, right? Zach Moss, we had him at 9.8, Deion Jackson, 9.02, kind of an even split here, right? All things considered. But what ended up happening is Moss dominated the touches. I think I saw he had 55 out of 56 offensive snaps here. And what I saw, what I did in this situation here was that I actually took projection share from Deion Jackson and moved it over to Zach Moss and ended up with much more of him. And I specifically did this based on how poorly Deion Jackson played last week. I think that, if you're a football fan, one thing that you're always going to hear coaches say is like, you cannot fumble the ball. You cannot give the ball to the other team, right? And Jackson fumbled twice last week, had like 10 carries for like 15 yards, like just very, very poor performance with Zach Moss inactive. And then Moss is active this week, whole inactive with an injury. I just thought that, Deion Jackson kind of got his shot last week, didn't do much with it. Zach Moss is back, probably just ride with him most of the way. And that's kind of what happened, right? But ultimately, I think what we wanted to get at here is that lineups with Zach Moss might not have graded out so well on sim ROI because of these projections. And then if you adjusted it, you might have ended up with lower sim ROI lineups, but lineups that ultimately did better in actual ROI. So what do you think about like the projection difference versus adjusting it versus playing lineups with Zach Moss and taking kind of a stand there?
Yeah, well, so why don't you just look at the actual ROIs of the top lineups here? Because I think this is where we got this idea, right? Because I think the person who ended up winning this contest if you just get out of Chipotle Addict and just look at actual ROIs, because I think we're just in Chipotle. And while you're doing this, I'll just talk about this, right? Yeah, so here we go. So if you look at the actual top lineup who ended up winning this contest, and you look at the sim ROI, it's actually negative. And there's two reasons for that, or maybe three, in my opinion, or maybe four, actually. One is Zach Moss, who we project very low, and Puka Nacua as well, who we projected pretty low, Darren Waller, and maybe even the Cowboys D, actually. It's sort of like people we thought were going to get a lot of ownership, and SaberSim did not project them well. And that combination is very bad for your ROI, obviously. And also there's not really there is actually a little bit of game stack here, so that seems fine. But I think to your point, fumbles is something I look at a lot week to week. I think it's sort of something that's going to go under the radar with projection systems, but combined with kind of coach speak, you can kind of tell when a coach is like, oh yeah, this guy fumbled and he's riding the bench, right? And I think with Deion Jackson fumbling, I think twice in week one, that was like a clear place where you could get some good value. So I really like the Zach Moss play, even though SaberSim did not. And that's okay, right? Like, I think the process of us looking at these ROIs is not just like having our blinders on saying that, hey, whatever SaberSim projected is absolutely correct. It's trying to project things correctly, trying to add value to SaberSim. And then when looking back at this, just considering the fact like, hey, maybe there are spots where things are going to change in week 3. And I guarantee you with both Puka and Zach Moss, that projection is going to change. And if that happens, it means we're probably wrong. And that's something where you can look at this lineup and be like, hey, actually, this is a good lineup because of the way this person projected things differently. And that's good. You should be looking for places where you can project better than what we're doing. We have to cover a very wide array of players. So if you can find a few players where we're wrong, that's something that I'm doing every week, then you can add a lot of value. And so I think this top lineup actually was quite good, even though our sim ROI for it was not that great.
Yeah, and just one thought that I had is like, it's still only week 2, right? We're still so early in the season. We're still learning about these players and how they interact with these new teams that they're on, et cetera, right? So one thing that I've kind of seen here is that a lot of these situations where it's up in the air, kind of 50-50, the projections that I've seen in SaberSim across the industry will kind of take a safe approach, kind of middle of the road, hedging, not lean one way or the other, right? And that is, kind of what we're talking about, like doing that research and picking a side almost, right? Like this Pua, like I wanted to see the Puka Nacua projection and the Rams receivers across the board. So Nacua projected for 11.83, Tutu Atwell was at 9.8, and then Van Jefferson was at 9.11. So all in all, within a 3-point range for their top 3 receivers. But if you watched last week's game, you saw how much action Puka had, how little like Van Jefferson was involved, and maybe you're looking at that and saying, projection systems kind of like, okay, was that a one-time occurrence? Is this something we're going to see regularly, right, with Cooper Kupp out? And I think that's an opportunity for somebody to go in there like, okay, I think that I want to lean this way. It's not that whether or not right? We're not talking about certainties or anything like that, but it's, hey, what side of this do I want to be on, or do I not want to have a side? And I think that's an opportunity to get some leverage one way or another.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, with young players, especially early in the season, that's going to be the place where our projection is going to have the most uncertainty. I mean, Puka, I think, is a really late round draft pick. He has a 1-game sample. It seemed wildly unlikely that this was not just like a flash in the pan type of situation. Now it sort of seems like maybe that's not true, and he's very good. And, you're right. It's like in those types of situations, it's good to sort of have the perspective, okay, this is where I need to focus on, where I need to take a stand either way. So I think that's a really good point. Do you want to look at just the top sim ROIs and see if we see anything interesting with that, just overall in
Yeah,
this contest?
of course. So this is everybody here at the moment.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting seeing the Cowboys appear again with the Whistles Go Woo, who is a sharp player. It's just like, it's just like everything is wrong with the setup, but when the ownership comes in that low, it ends up being a really nice play. I think Russell, it's funny. It's like, it's really interesting. Something that I'm seeing is these kind of like mid-tier stacks that just like no one is going to play. The Sims just really, really love. Russell Wilson's another one, right? It's just like, he's kind of like not great value, but he's good enough to have a 300-yard game. And you play him and you stack him, and that high leverage stack is going to, Baker Mayfield's another one. It's like, these guys who would actually go off, like, not talking about Josh Dobbs, who actually had a good game, but, these people who are like really low tier, but these guys who are like mid tier, who are just going to go woefully under-owned, they end up being like pretty good stacks. And I think that's going to be even more true in these really big contests. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's very interesting.
I'd say one thing, or probably two things here that are standing out to me. So first is the use of tight ends in the flex here. I think that, there is a common DFS heuristic that you do not want to play a tight end in your flex here, but we see it with top players, right? With this Whistles lineup, double tight end here with Irv Smith and Okonkwo. I saw this Chipotle addict one with Kelsey and Troutman. We see another high one here with Kelsey and Troutman, and then I think I saw one more down here with Okonkwo and Higbee here as well, right? So we're seeing top players do it. I see it constantly in the Discord, and I'll show people how to do it, but I will just warn them to question why they're doing that in the first place, right? Where did they get that? Did they get that 5 years ago? Does it still hold true to this day? I'm curious your thoughts on tight ends in the flex.
It's funny is last year I would make it no tight ends in the flex, and what I've been doing this year actually more is I'm sort of deselecting the tight ends that I don't want in the flex that I feel like are lower upside, and I'm letting the ones that have higher upside be in the flex. So it is really interesting, right? It's sort of a thing, but I think it's sort of like you can, and sometimes you shouldn't. I think the interesting thing that I'm also, this is slightly off topic, but it's sort of on topic. When you're building a SaberSim, right, you're building 5,000 lineups, which in the scheme of things is not that many. Even though I'm very blessed that the builder, it's very great that the builder allows us to build that many, because a lot of places you can't even build that many, but it's not that much in the scheme of things. And because of that, I think you do have to have some heuristics just to make sure that you get 5,000 lineups that aren't wasted, because if you get an extra 1,000 lineups that end up being some higher ROI lineups, then I want to make sure that like every single one that I'm getting at least has a chance to have a good sim ROI. So I think having heuristics like that is good, but you're right. It's like, it's not an always thing. And I think, someone like Chiga Okonkwo, who does have high upside, and Irv Smith, who does have high upside, that's a place where you can go double tight end and it's going to be fine.
Yeah, I did like your point about, I'm not so worried about the position or the player that comes up. I'm interested in the upside. Okay, yeah. I just had one more point here that I saw here is a lot of correlation still, right? You're seeing these QB +2 with bring back, QB +2, QB +3 with the bring back, and the running back defense correlation here. So yeah. I think getting down here like QB +3 with a run back, QB 3, QB +2 with the running back pair with his defense, QB +3, QB +3, right? So still seeing a lot of those things that we talked about last week here. And then even like more correlation on top of that with these mini stacks, right? So I think it was like the primary stack with the mini stack correlation here that was kind of really standing out to me in some of these high similar lineups.
That makes a lot of sense. Why don't we look at like a single entry or something, like the spin move or something like that, something that's like a small contest size, because it's just at the bottom. Yeah. Because I'm just really curious because, like, Josh Kelly, I'm assuming, is someone who got kind of steamed in this contest, would be my guess. Deebo Samuel as well. So I'm just curious what the builder ended up thinking about those two players. Do they end up being in the highest ROI lineups or not?
For anybody listening, 38% Joshua Kelly actual ownership in the contest, Deebo Samuel 32% actual ownership in the contest. The only two players over 30% here. So gonna pop this out and then see what we are seeing.
Yeah, again, it's very interesting. And Josh Kelly ended up not doing well, and that's actually one of those things where I don't know if that was just a range of in his range of outcomes, or he wasn't a good play. I'm still sort of internally debating that as well. But it is really interesting that these guys are still showing up, especially Kelly, in the highest RO lineups. Deebo Samuel, it seems like maybe not as much. I'm seeing him in one lineup, but it is a stack, and SaberSim did really like him. So he sort of shows up he shows up, but not as much in these. But now he's still showing up a lot. It's very interesting. I mean,
I think some of these pivots off Deebo are like interesting, right? So like you're seeing like IU come up twice. You're seeing CMC. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I saw a similar situation yesterday, kind of with the Bills, which I think relates to this a little bit. So like Bills were like pretty chalky, all things considered. A lot of Josh Allen with Stephon Diggs and the Adams run back. I felt like if you're looking at like cash type of stuff, that was like really, really popular. But then kind of I was looking at this like, okay, how do you get to this without playing this exact, construction? And Gabe Davis was sitting down there at like very low ownership. And I thought including Davis or swapping away from Davis, swapping away from Diggs to Davis was a way to like get exposure either to Josh Allen or the Bills or this game in a way that was different. Right. And looking at this, it feels like, okay, how do we play Deebo without or in a different way, or how do we get exposure to what could be good opportunities for Deebo? And maybe that's getting to Ayuk, or maybe that's getting to CMC, or maybe it's getting to some of these Niner stacks together, right? So something that I was just thinking about a lot yesterday was how do you get to the good game environment in a different way, and kind of relating that like to baseball. It's like, how do you get to, the Braves and Coors differently than everybody else is going to? And it's going to be with lineup construction or with stack construction or playing it in a different manner. But that's something I was thinking about a lot yesterday.
Could we look at the quarterback exposure in this contest? Because I'm really curious. It's a single entry. It's really small field. It's like, it's interesting. It's like Josh Allen really didn't get steamed as much as people thought he would. So that's sort of interesting, right? It's sort of like if you think too deeply about these things, sometimes you're going to psych yourself out about just doing something where it's just like, hey, you can just play the best play. You don't need to get too crazy about it. I'm also curious, what is the lowest sim ROI contest? Because my sense of it is basically, or sim ROI lineup, because my sense of things is basically like, oh, well, someone played Cam Akers. So let's go
let's get that
a little bit. Yeah. So, if you look at things, someone played Daniel. I don't want to like highlight like, oh, this person made a huge mistake, right? But I think when it comes down to it, when you're thinking about what is a bad lineup, it's not rocket science, right? It's like you're going too contrarian and you're playing plays that are just too low projected, right? And you're not stacking, which this person is doing. It's like it's Anthony Richardson, but and he got injured sadly, but he's not pairing him with the pass catcher, and he is using Nico Collins as a bring back, which ended up being good. But basically, and if we could scroll down farther too, is if you get too contrarian, playing Samaje Perine, playing Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney with Justin Fields when they're priced up just so high, this is the type of thing that this is how you make a bad lineup, is just getting just way too off the board in a spot where someone is just not projected well enough. It's not this thing where it's like, I played too chalky of a lineup and my ROI is terrible. It's just like not stacking and playing just way too off the board plays is just going to get you way in trouble.
And I think one thing standing out to me, I'm seeing a lot of QB plus ones, or I kind of expect like some of these naked QB lineups to be a little lower sim ROI, but all of the QB plus ones or even QB plus ones with the bring back here that are grading out particularly low is kind of just telling me that I think at a baseline, people are stacking a quarterback with a pass catcher here, but if you really want to take advantage of those situations, increasing the correlation of your lineup as a whole with a QB plus 2 or even QB plus 3s is still holding true, building off last week.
Yeah. I think also that an interesting one is Roschon Johnson, because I kind of get why people used him. I think, right, what happened is one of the running backs ended up being deactivated. So it's him and Khalil Herbert.
Deontay Foreman got.
And it's kind of like a similar situation to Kyron Williams in a sense, right? Where it's like, hey, there was some surprise inactive at running back. What should we do? But in this situation, this is where projection comes in, where it's like, hey, both these running backs still aren't going to be projecting very well if this happens. So it is really good to just keep an eye. It's like, is this guy now becoming a good value, or did just an inactive happen and the person didn't? The same thing happened with Dameon Pierce, actually. It was kind of a week of like, hey, there's a lot of running back inactives, but Kyron Williams was the only one where his projection went way up. And that's why he became a good play. It's not just like, as soon as a running back's inactive, we're just hammering the angle there, even though it might make a difference. So that's something that's standing out to me as well.
Right. If that inactive can like 100% translate to more touches for the next guy up, I think, Akers being the quote unquote starter the week before had a little more to do with it compared to some of these guys who were just in the committee, right? I think that's what I'm getting from that.
Yeah.
So let's get out of these very low sim ROI lineups. Although I did like that. I don't think that's something that we did previously, right? It's like, hey, let's look at, the lineups that are grading out the worst in the sim and see what we can even learn from those, right? So not only just learning from the lineups that did the best, but the lineups that did the worst, and, some cautionary tales as you have it here. This is a really small field, right? 370 total entries in this contest. So I think that this contest was particularly different from some of the other ones that we've looked at.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that is standing out to me, and I think this is true across contests, is, people nowadays in DFS, they do like getting different exposure through the QB and sort of using it for getting their diversity. And you just tell, right? It's like, if you think Josh Allen is just going to get steamed, or any quarterback on any week, you're probably wrong. My guess is that you're just not going to see that high exposure to any quarterback. And that's not to say, right, like as we're saying, Baker Mayfield, Russell Wilson, they ended up being really good stacks in big field contests. And I think that was even probably more true in the flagship millionaire maker. Geno Smith as well is someone that I really liked who came in low ownership, right? So like you want to find those stacks, but like, you know, trying to get contrarian going from like Josh Allen to Trevor Lawrence, if you think Allen's actually better, it's not going to help that much. And it's probably actually a bad move. So I think that stands out to me as well. It's like choosing the like third best QB in your actual mind where you're like, yeah, I actually think Josh Allen's a better play than Trevor Lawrence, but hey, you know, Josh Allen's going to get huge ownership. I don't think that's going to make much of a difference, and you're actually better off playing Josh Allen. I put in 3 lineups. I'm sorry, I put in more than 3 lineups, but I put in a few lineups in the 5-5-5, and you know, my top lineup was Josh Allen. I just thought to myself, you know, it's my top lineup. It has a really high ROI projected. I'm just going to go with him, and that's fine. And it ended up working out because he really did not get steamed at all.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, at the end of the day, Josh Allen is, or your quarterback is one piece in a 9-player lineup, right? So not to say that he in and of himself is going to make or break it, right? So don't be afraid to go with that play if that's what's grading out the best. I don't think that, you know, that one player is going to affect it too much there. But
right,
Max,
and I think you're yeah. I was just going to make the last point. I think your overall point is totally right from before about Josh Allen. It's just like, you know, if you think someone's going to be chalky and you really like them, just like 3 stack them with like someone who's going to be on under-owned, right? It's like Josh Allen, Gabe Davis, Dalton Kincaid, or Josh Allen, Steph Diggs, Gabe Davis, something like that, right? Or even, you know, you saw with Trevor Lawrence last week. It's like Christian Kirk being a piece of your lineup. You know, he's going to be low owned, and that kind of makes your stack a lot better. So looking for those types of places where, hey, you know, I might be using a chalky player, but the stack is going to be a little different. It's going to be helpful.
Yeah, totally. Well said there. But, you know, to kind of wrap up here, I think we've hit on all the points that we talked about that we wanted to get to here, looking at, you know, a bigger contest, looking at a smaller contest, talking about how the dynamics change here, covering different points with, you know, late swapping, trying to be available for news, taking advantage of that and seeing how, you know, I think that people look at a sport like NBA and they're like, okay, I'm going to need to late swap, right? And then with NFL, they're like, you know, I'm just going to set it and forget it. And the edge with late swap is almost even bigger in NFL when that news does ultimately come out. We talked about, you know, taking some stands early in the season, picking a side with some of these situations that are kind of 50-50 or projections are a little uncertain with small sample sizes here. And we've talked about, you know, quarterbacks and how the ownership of, you know, one player isn't going to make or break your lineup here. But I hope I summed that up well. But with that being said, you know, we are going to be back next week for our week 3 review here. Max, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just have just 2. I mean, I just want to really highlight, I think the Kyren Williams situation is actually pretty rare. We might see it maybe once or twice in this entire season after this, but you know, I really just want to highlight, like, having him in your lineup ended up being such a good move and basically it was a make or break situation for the ROI of your lineup. So just really want to emphasize that, like, if you see a situation where you can late swap to a player who really has a significant projection boost and becomes a good value, that's just so good. And then the thing that I'm just really taking away is, you know, for the contest you're in, finding that quarterback and that stack that's a low owned stack, that's like a low owned 2 or 3 stack, is just so good. It's so good for your ROI. And, you know, it's going to be different in different contests, right? For the bigger millionaire maker, that was Dak Prescott, right? But for like this contest, you know, where 370 people, that might be Geno Smith or Lamar Jackson or Daniel Jones or someone like that. So just finding those low owned stacks, depending on what contest you're in, those are going to be the best RO lineups. And that's going forward are going to be the lineups that I'm going to look to use a lot more. So
right on. Well, hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys have comments or feedback, drop it in the YouTube comments here. We're always looking for feedback or ideas about what you guys are looking for in these reviews. We do these reviews for you guys, trying to show off the tools, trying to show you how you can use them to help your own DFS process here, right? But until next week, take care. We will see you guys. Bye.